One of the most powerful features of Revit for our electrical designs is the interface between the circuits that we create on floor plans and their representation in various kinds of schedules, typically known as panel schedules, which can actually be associated with panelboards and switchboards, as well as other distribution equipment like meter centers, motor control centers, and even generators and inverters. This video is a very in-depth, in-the-weeds, detailed overview of Revit's panel schedules, how to create them, how to edit their templates, and how to use them in your projects. I pretty much guarantee you will learn about some features that you didn't even know existed. And at the end of this video, I will show 4 pro tips to help you deal with situations that you will most likely run into. And if we haven't met yet, my name is Rob, and welcome to my channel. Let's get right into it. So I'm in Revit 2025, and I'm using the sample project from Autodesk called Snowden Towers. This is the electrical model that has architectural and other trades linked in. I'm going to use this project to explain the panel schedules. There's a number of panels and switchboards in this project already made that we can use. So let's get to a floor plan, power. So first of all, you have to have a panel or switchboard actually installed into your model to create a panel schedule for it. So here in this room here, we can see this guy is a panel, P203 is how they have it labeled. And you click on that, electrical equipment, lighting and appliance panel board. If I was to go ahead and create similar, let's put a panel right here. If I click on that, I can go up here and say create panel schedules. And I can use a default template, or I can choose a template. And we'll show how to create a default template here. But right now, let's say choose a template, and you will see there's the templates that I have already defined for branch panels jumps up here. Now I'll use the branch panel default, hit OK, then it creates this blank panel schedule. Or instead of doing it from your actual model, you can go up to Analyze, Panel Schedules button, and then create panel schedules. And a list of every kind of panel and switchboard in your model comes up. Now this model happens to have a number of 12-volt panels for their solar on the roof. But we can come down and find this 100 amp 3-phase that we just put in there and say, click that and say OK. And it will use the default template. And if you don't have a name set up here on the right, under panel name right here, it will just give it the name of the type itself, which was the 100 amp 3-phase 4-wire. A better approach would be to at least name this panel P203A before creating its panel schedule. And so if we delete this one, go up here and create panel schedule and use the default. Now it gives it the name of the panel. And at the end, like I mentioned, one pro tip I'll show is how to actually rename these panels and get them to show up properly renamed over here in your project browser. But one of the first things I'd like to point out about this is there's kind of what I would call a dance between what shows up in the properties for a panel, both instance parameters that you can see in the properties dialog, or if you go into edit type, here are the type properties that you can see. Some of these are shown also in the panel schedule. So you'll see up here at the top you have location, and I can't change that. It is hard-coded in Revit as an instance parameter that we can't change. Supplied from. If I was to connect this panel to an upstream source like a switchboard, then supply from would show up here as, again, an unchangeable automatic instance parameter. Mounting. Now you'll find that mounting is just a text. I can just change this to whatever I want, say mount, and over on the right, you will see that reflected over here under general mounting. There's that mount that I typed in. So that is an instance parameter that you can type in. Enclosure, again, is just text that you can type in, and it shows up over here under general enclosure. So you can type in some descriptions for that. Volts. I can't change the volts. It is a hard-coded internal instance parameter that you see over here under the distribution system. Same with phases and wires. Those are all hard-coded instance parameters. The AIC rating. This here is just text that, again, is shown over here on the right. Down here under electrical circuiting, here's the short circuit rating. Now the mains type ends up being an actual type parameter, not an instance parameter. So you get this warning that you're changing all types. So mains type, and then if you look at the parameters in here, here's mains type. Mains rating is a number. I can't type in ABC. It has to be a number. So you can put a rating. Let's call this, change it to 200 amps and see, or 200 to see what happens. It's hard-coded as amps. And it shows up here under mains. And you can change that either place, and it's reflected. And then main circuit breaker rating is the same idea. It's changeable here. It has to be amps, and it shows up over here, main circuit breaker rating. So that's called the header of the panel schedule. Now, the center area they call the circuit table because it's a tabular format. And this first column and then the last column is called the circuit number. Now, these are just showing circuit numbers like you would see down the side of a panel board, but they can actually be changed. If you look over here, I still have the properties of the actual panel over on the right. If you go down to circuit naming right here, click on that, there's a drop down. And right now, I believe we have it set up for standard, but you can set it up for prefixed. And then under here, there's a circuit prefix separator and a circuit prefix. So the circuit prefix can be anything. Maybe you want to call this existing, maybe in EX, and then put a dash and apply that. Now, as you can see on the panel schedule, all of your circuits have the EX-1 in them, and that would show up on home runs as well. So that can be changed. We typically go standard, so it's just numbers, but you can also have the panel name hard-coded into each circuit, which in this case, the panel name is long, so it doesn't show up. You can have the phase A, B, or C attached to the circuit number to remind you which phase they are connected to. And then by project, I have not yet seen how that applies because it just gives me numbers. Anyway, I like to stay with the standard circuit naming. And there's a little spot here for a legend if you want to type something. And at the bottom is a spot called notes. You can type some text. And then this is the load table, the load classification. It will list your loads. For example, let's go into this panel P203, and you can see all of your panel schedules are listed in alphabetical order on the left. Panel 203. And this has a number of receptacles and lighting and HVAC and other kinds of loads. At the bottom with this load table, you can see it sorts them by load classification. So HVAC, there's a connected load of 10,000 VA, applies 100% demand factor, so the demand is the same. Lighting, they've got it set as lighting dwelling units with a 100% demand factor, and we have other and receptacles and power. And then we get the total connected load without any demand factors, the total estimated demand, which does apply any demand factors. So if we had 125% applied to lighting, it would calculate that. So the total connected, total estimated demand are all calculated within this panel schedule at the bottom. So this panel schedule was created with a panel schedule template. And as you saw, it used the default template. So now let's get into how do we actually edit these templates to make this look different. Perhaps your company standard applies some different columns, or you have things arranged differently, you numbered differently even. You have different things in the header. So we can change all of that. It's very customizable. So the way we do that is we go up to the Manage tab. And in the center here, you'll see Panel Schedule Templates. Click on that. And you can manage your templates, all of your templates, or you can just edit a single template. This is a shortcut to just get to editing one template. But if we go to Manage Templates, now you can see that we have Manage Templates, what type? Well, we were in the branch panel type. You also have a data panel if you're doing that kind of work, but the other one we're interested in is the switchboard. Now, there's only one default switchboard, and we'll get into that next. But right now, we're going to look at the branch panels, which are typically like a panel board or a load center. You can hit the edit button to edit one of these, or you can duplicate one if you want to create something similar. So if you want to create your own, you want to duplicate it first and then edit that new one. You can actually rename it, or you can even delete it from here. And you can set the default. Right now that's already the default, but if I want to change it to a feed through lugs panel, I can make this the default and it switches. So this is how you can manage your templates. You can also, this apply templates button, you hit that. Now we can apply a template to my panels. You can do this manually by opening each panel schedule and changing the template, or you can do it globally right here. So if I was to hold down Shift and select all of these, I could change all of these to feed through lug panel. And if you do change templates, it lets you know that any text that you entered in the panel schedule that's not stored in a parameter is going to be lost when you change a template. For example, if I typed anything under notes or legend or notes at the bottom, it will be gone because it's not contained within a parameter. So keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and manage these templates. We are going to, for demonstration purposes, let's go ahead and create a copy of this default panel schedule. So let's go back into our manage templates. You may wonder what type of schedule gets applied to my piece of equipment. How does Revit know whether to use a branch panel style template or to use a switchboard style of template? Well, that is hard-coded into each of the families of panels and switchboards and things like that. And at the end, I'll show you a pro tip on how you can actually change what type of schedule is applied to your piece of equipment. But for demonstration purposes, we're going to go ahead and create a copy of this default branch panel, and so we can edit that and practice these features. So let's go ahead and hit duplicate. I'm going to call this a main lug only panel, because that's one thing I want to change, because the built-in template has a main circuit breaker, but I don't always want that main circuit breaker showing. Main lug only, and let us go to edit. So now we are in the actual template editor, and you can see up here under template editor, we can finish the template or cancel the template. So that lets you know that we're in the editor, and up top, you'll see a whole new ribbon for editing panel schedule templates. And this works also in the switchboard templates. First thing I'll show is that you will see in here that there's a number of things in these little brackets, and these are actual parameters. And in the top left, you can see electrical equipment panel name is the name of this parameter. If you click the drop down, you will see all the parameters that are available to be included within this panel schedule. So this is panel name, but you have everything: elevation from level, what level is it on. You even have some odd ones like excavation volume on top solid, voltage comments. You have busing, feed through lugs, number of phases, apparent powers, different kinds of loads. I mean, look at this. There's hundreds of parameters that could be put into a panel schedule. There's panel name, enclosure, location, mounting. Those are some of the parameters you can see up here in this header. So that's where these come from. So you click on location. Again, it's one of the many parameters under electrical equipment. You can also include some project information in here. So things like the author, building name. You can have some other things, project issue, project date, name, things like that, can also be placed into a panel schedule if you like. And these columns can be moved around. You can change the sizing of things. You can change the height of things, and we'll get into that in a minute. But what I want to show you here is up top left, set template options. These are some of the main options within the template. We have general settings, circuit table, and load summary. So let's look at the general settings. These settings apply to the entire panel schedule template. Well, you can further customize the appearance in the actual template view itself. So it's branch panel MLO, branch panel size. Now, total width. Looks like out of the box, it's set for 11.4 inches. You can change this to whatever you want. You can make it wider, narrower. Personally, I prefer a more narrow panel schedule, so I will go with a 10-inch panel schedule. And then number of slots shown, so like number of circuits, number of poles. Right now, the default is set to a fixed constant of 42. That may work for you, and some people like a constant setting, but I prefer a variable number of slots based on the max number of single pole breakers shown. So, what does that mean? Now, back in your plan view, I can't get to it now because I'm in an edit, but you will see that one of the instance parameters of a panel is how many maximum number of single pole circuits are in it. So if you change it to a 12 circuit panel there, then it would also change the schedule to 12 circuit. That's the way I prefer it. And it gets a little wonky if you go more than 42 circuits. Like if you go with an 84 circuit panel, it gets a little crazy on the formatting. But again, at the end of one of my pro tips, I will show how to deal with that formatting issue. There's parts. You want to show the header. You want to show the load summary. Do you want to show the footer? Maybe you have something like just a residential panel where you don't need the load summary because you're going to do it based on square footage elsewhere. So you can change what parts you show. And then you even have some minor control over the borders. Do you want an outside border of a template? Do you want a border between the parts? Do you want it in thin lines? Do you want it wide lines? You can change the appearance of that. And that only shows up once you drag it onto a sheet. So that's the general settings. Now the circuit table, this is kind of the meat of the schedule in the middle. Settings apply to the circuit table part, column header, text orientation. Right now I've got it horizontal. What happens if I go to vertical? Let's apply that. What it does is like it says, it changes the headers of each column to a vertical format. I suppose if you're trying to make this more narrow, you could do something like that, but you have some variety there if you want to do that. I prefer horizontal. And then, how do you want to show your loads? Right now, we have loads in split columns by phase. So we take each phase, split it, and show the left circuit here and the right circuit here for each phase. You can just do loads by phase. It pretty much doubles the height of this circuit table, but that's one method. You can loads in a shared column if you want to just do it this way rather than have this separate split column. Or you can have 3 separate columns, left side and right side. So whatever you prefer, you can set that up. This is the way we typically show it. And you can show the circuit number on one row for multiple phase circuits. Now the way that works, but if you had a 1, 3, 5, it would say 1, 3, and 5 all in one row. So let me show how that works. So finish that template, and I'm going to apply this template. So change template. I'm going to change it to this MLO. And yes, we know. For example, what happened here is this 3-pole circuit now has all 3 circuits in one line. And as you can see, with the width of my panel schedule, that does not leave enough room to show all of those. But that could be an option if you like to see your panels done that way. So let's go back to the edit. But I want to show you some of these in practice so you can see what they look like. Let's just edit that one template. And we're back. Okay. And this one's grayed out, but the next one is auto shading for displaying load. Now, what does that mean? You click that and you don't really see anything here. Let's save this and apply it to our panel. So let's go to change template and update it. If we look at this panel on the right, this is where I'm talking about the number of circuits. Click on the panel over on the right. Down at the bottom, you will see electrical circuiting maximum number of single pole breakers is set to 24. We set up this panel schedule to vary the number of rows for the number of poles. If we had set this up to a 42 circuit all of the time, then the shading would apply. So let me do that as an example. Fix it to 42. Finish it. Let's apply that to this one. Here's the shading. So it just takes beyond circuit 24, so the circuits 25 through 42, it shades all of the poles for the circuits that are unused. This may somehow signify to the installer that we don't need a full 42 circuit panel. Personally, to me, this isn't quite clear enough, but I think that's the intent of the shading. So again, if that's something you find beneficial, you have that option. So let's go back to our variable. And we don't need auto shading. Now, for panels other than 3-phase panels, do you want to hide the column for the unused phases or show it but disable the column for unused phases? And I have another video, which I'll put in the description below, which showed how I customize a 3-phase panel to be a 2-phase or single phase, if you will, panel with only 2 phases. And the whole B column is just gone. It doesn't show at all. That's the way I have it set up. If I select this second option, I can actually show that center column, but it's disabled. It'll just be shaded out. Again, I find that's a bit misleading, but maybe you were looking for a consistent width on all of your panel schedules, and that's the way you want it to be. And then shows the phase column values as either apparent power in VA or as current in amps. We prefer to show the VA, and we like our load summaries done in VA and then converted to amps. The way this panel is set up, you get both. You get the total load in apparent power, and you get the total amps down at the bottom, and just not a per circuit number. But you can set that up however you like. So that's the circuit table. Now let's look at the load summary portion of the template. These settings apply to the load summary. Column header, again, you can go vertical, and it's down here at the load summary. You make this, pop this up to be a little higher, and you can have verticals if you want. I prefer the horizontal. Now, showing the panel schedule, only loads that are connected to the panel. So only load classifications for loads that are in your panel, or you can have a constant set of loads classifications that show up whether they are included in this bus, in this panel or bus or not. This reminds me of in Excel, we had, 6 load classifications, and that's all we got. And they were always there, and sometimes they had 0. So if you want to do that, you need to pick which load classifications you want. If you know your projects only have lighting and receptacles and motors and kitchen equipment and HVAC, you can do this, apply it, and then only those would show up at the bottom. So we finish the template, and let's apply it to this panel and see what we get. You can see now at the bottom you have just lighting, receptacles, motors, just those 5 that I chose, and some are 0. So if you like this format and you know you're not going to be using other load classifications, by all means, go for this. As you can see here, though, we do get a warning. You have 1 or more loads connected to this panel that are not displayed in the panel schedule and the load classification to report this information in the load summary. So you're going to be missing some loads down here. You don't see it here. Now, it appears that it does get connected here because we have here 10,018, so that's 11.8, but we have 12.8. So 1,000 VA of load is still shown in the connected load. And it's still shown up here. It's just a graphic glitch, but it's not listed in a load classification. Again, up to you. But we do prefer to show it as they are used. So we'll go back to that. So let's go back to there. And we're good. Any of these show up that we want to. Okay. So that's the template option. If you're getting some value out of this video, I'd sure appreciate you hitting that thumbs up like button down below. And if you want to see more electrical only content, hit that subscribe. I appreciate that. Now you can see that we have this ribbon with a number of things, and this is context related. So it depends on what you actually click on. Click on this and I have a number of things I can put in this there. This here is just text. So you can actually change this if you want. You can include some calculated values and enter some formulas if you want to do some additional calculations inside this schedule. You can combine parameters. And I don't use that, but how that could work is right now we show the load name. But let's say we wanted to put two things in here. Instead of creating a line in a separate cell, I can combine two parameters here. So I can say combine parameters. Here's a list of all the parameters that I can combine. So let's say I'm going to take my load name right here, put it in here. There's a separator of a dash, and I'm going to put a space and a space. And then what else do I want to combine that with? Let's say I want to put in what type of load is it? So let's go to load classification. Maybe I want that shown circuit by circuit. Okay. Now I have load name with load classification, and it looks like I have a trailing slash, which I don't want. So let's go back to fix that. We don't need a trailing separator. Okay. Now let's apply this to this panel. So, but just to show you the process. Now, receptacle studio unit, it puts receptacle after it. Other studios, it puts other. It looks like they already had the load classification installed first that they manually typed in. But if you didn't have that, and you just had studio unit and you wanted receptacle to show up after it, or HVAC to show up after it, this is one thing you can do to combine parameters. So it was just kind of an example of what you can do. Now to undo these combined parameters, I can't just get rid of a parameter. That doesn't work. What you have to do is click on this, actually go up to the parameter itself and find it again. So let's go back down and find the load name. And there, that reassigns that. And as you can see, you reassign one and all of them follow suit. So freeze rows and columns. This just lets you freeze the size of rows and columns so that you can't change their size using grips. If I hit freeze rows and columns, now I cannot change the size of these by accident, which sometimes when you're trying to pick things, it makes it handy. Because like here, I'm trying to pick this and I'm ending up with the resize command. So you can just freeze these. Now you can still change the size of them with resize column and resize row manually, but you won't do it by accident. So that's kind of handy to have on there. You can insert columns, you can delete columns, you can resize them, insert rows, delete rows. So just like any spreadsheet, you can start adding rows and columns. Now you can merge and unmerge. Combines multiple cells into one, or you can separate cells into the original. Hold down Control and pick both of these cells and say merge. Now it's all one big cell called branch panel. And then here I can hold Control down, merge these, and this can be the panel name. Get down here to, I think it's under the General tab, General Panel Name, and you can change fonts. Branch panel is 3/16 bold, so let's do the same for the panel name. Edit font. We want 3/16 and bold. If I wanted to, for example, call this existing branch panel and have a long panel name, I can do that. And I can change the template, apply it to this, and you can see existing branch panel, and I can have a longer name. So I could save this as a template called existing branch panel. So we'll go back to our standard for this one. And we'll just put MLO branch panel. Now insert graphic. I have not used this, but I would think you could put something like your company logo in here if you like. Let's go ahead and bring in this little guy. And look at that. There's the logo. You put your company logo up in the top right of your panel schedule. Now, edit borders. Kind of like in Excel where you can edit the borders. You can customize each cell. And one thing I noticed up here, I was going to make this a main logo only branch panel. So I want to get rid of this main circuit breaker rating. I just need to hit delete, and I can just delete that parameter. Simple as that. Now we have a main load only branch panel that doesn't show the main circuit breaker, which can be very confusing to the installers. And you can also edit the shading. You can add some color to your panel schedules. And then I showed how you can edit the font. You can align text left and right, like for here. If we want to align it centered, you can do that. And this is on a cell-by-cell basis. Right now, these are all left justified, but you can change these however you like. And of course, you can align them vertically too. So let's finish this up and apply it. See what we get. So right now, this has a main circuit breaker. Change the template. Another way you can change these templates is with the manage panel schedule templates, manage. We can apply the changes to this. Now remember, asterisks denote panel schedules associated with an older version of a template. So it shows P203 has an older version. Update it. Yes. Okay. Now we lost our main circuit breaker. We added our little company logo. There we go. That's how you can edit a schedule for a panel board. Now, let's also look at the switchboard type of schedules, which will be very similar. We won't need to cover this in as much detail. Let's look at an actual switchboard. One of the switchboards here is actually called switchboard. So let's look at that. As you can see, it's similar. Same kind of heading. It uses the word switchboard up here. And it's set up for a single column instead of a dual column. Has a description, and this one has the number of poles and frame size, trip rating, and the loads and remarks. So there's a few extra things in this table. And then we have the same kind of load classifications and summaries. So if we get into edit this, what I would like to do is edit this for the way that we show our switchboards. We have decided that our one-line diagram indicates number of poles, frame size, and trip ratings. I do not want to duplicate that in this schedule. So we get rid of these three columns and just let this be more or less a load summary of the switchboard. So let's go up to manage, panel schedule templates. We don't just want to edit it. We also want to copy it first. So let's go to switchboard, duplicate this switchboard, and we're going to call this our custom switchboard. So ER, and let's edit this. Now, one thing I'd like to know is, remember, you need to copy before you edit, because from here, there's no save as panel template. You can't save this as a different name. You just finish a template and it's the same name. So you have to copy it and rename it first. So we have circuit, description, number of poles. Now what I can do is just delete this whole column. Frame size, delete the column, and trip rating, delete the column. Now I can resize this load. Maybe I don't need it this wide, so this is where I would go in here and change the general size, get this down to also a 10-inch width. I can create another one of these and call it meter center. Or I can create one called motor control center or things like that, or I can call it even generator. And I can save different versions of my schedules with different names. But we'll go ahead and leave this one as switchboard. And again, maybe I want to have a main circuit breaker one and an MLO one. So this is good for now. This is my revised switchboard, and I can just change this template to the ER. Yes. And we see that I just end up with my load summary and remarks and no trip or frame rating. So everything else on the switchboard is pretty much the same as the panel board. So now I want to show you what can you actually do in the panel board itself, because again, there's another ribbon. We're not in the template. We are actually in the panel schedule. What can I do to it? So let's get back to our panel 203. Now again, you can open these from here, or you can open them from your plan view. If you click on this, you can just go up to edit the panel schedule right here. So we're in the actual panel schedule. We've already shown a number of times how you can change the template with this button. The next button over is rebalance the loads. If I'm trying to make these loads end up similar. We have a range of 32 to 41 amps. If I would like these to be closer to the same, I can just click the rebalance loads. Now, it will rearrange the phasing of these, and so it may not look the way you want. So rebalance loads, there. It just totally rebalanced left to right, up and down, all kinds, and it got them a little close to 34 to 38. But again, just to know that it's going to move these all around. If you had a preference of receptacles on your left and lighting on your right, that's all out the window. So use this with caution. I'm going to undo that. You could actually lock or unlock individual circuits to keep them from being rebalanced if you want. So let's say you want all of these receptacles to be locked, and then you do the rebalance. These will stay where they are. So you have some control over that. But again, I don't use the rebalance very often. And you can unlock those. Now, renumber indices, I don't use as well. If for some reason things got messed up, I guess that would renumber it for you. Now, click on one. Switch phase doesn't even light up. Now, you can move circuits around. Remember that Revit automatically applies the next circuit when you are circuiting in your actual model. Now, that circuiting order, whether it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 1, 3, 5, is set up elsewhere, and I'll show you that in a minute. But it's automatic. You can't jump in here and say, I want this receptacle to be on circuit 12. It just automatically goes to the next available. So you use the automatic circuiting, then you can come into the panel schedule and move things around. If I want this circuit to move down, I hit move down, and it goes down circuit at a time, as you can see. I can move it across, hit move across, and it pops over here. So it's very easy to rearrange your circuits within a panel. So the automatic feature isn't as much of a problem, since you can easily move things around. You can even explicitly move this to where you want, move it to, and it'll light up green areas that you can move it. So I can move this HVAC back over to here. And of course, all of the circuiting is reflected in your smart home run tags. So there's no problem with that either. Now, if you click on the blank area here, you can assign it as a spare, which means it has a circuit breaker in it, or you can assign it as a space or a blank, or some people call it provisions, things like that. So if you want to make sure that these last three cells get a spare, hit spare, and it puts spare, and it just puts by default a 20 amp. You can change that to a 15 or whatever you want. Now, that's one use for this. Another thing I might note is that you can actually hit spare, and you can change the name of spare. You can call this future load, for example. And let's put in, we know we're going to be hooking up maybe a 1500 VA load to there. You can do things like that, or existing load, things like that. You can use spare for other purposes, and it reflects it down here in the load classification. Now, the only negative is it calls it spare, and it applies 100% demand factor. But I can use this sometimes if I'm in the process of, early design of a project, and I know that I need to hook up some lighting circuits, and I don't have them circuited yet. I may just put in a placeholder for lighting and put in some load, and at least it's showing up at 100% down here to give me an idea what my future panel load will be. So you can use this for a number of different things. And then the space is just space. There's no breaker associated with it. And you can add and remove these spaces. Remove it. I already covered the lock and unlock. Now, this group or ungroup says group single pole circuits and spares together to act as a multi-pole circuit. So if you have, let's say we have three together, group and ungroup them, and you'll see a little blue dashed line. So these now all move as a group. If I take one and I say move two, it treats those as a group. So I want all those three grouped together. So there's a way to actually group some circuits that are not on a multi-pole breaker. And we can ungroup those. Update names. Be careful with this. Update names will change the names from whatever you typed in for the load description, and it changes it to the load type. If I do it for all of these update names, you can see all it did was put the load classification in there, got rid of all the rest of the information. So be careful with this one. You don't want to get rid of all the work you've put into these load names. And then not only can you edit the font within the template, but you can also edit the font in here. So let's say I had one of these that I wanted to highlight for some reason. Let's say I want to make an existing load stand out. I could go to edit font and bold that up or make it a larger font, something like that. So you can vary the fonts of each cell, and then you can align these. If, again, the template has alignment, but you can also align each cell if you want. Change that to a right or center. So you have ultimate control over these cells, even once the panel is already made. Now, one more thing I'd mentioned is that some of the features of the panel schedules are controlled elsewhere. Let me show you some of those. I'd mentioned the circuiting order. As you're in your power plan and you're connecting things to circuits, what order do those get applied to your panel schedule? The way you get to that is Manage, MEP Settings, Electrical Settings. And if you go here to General, you go down to Circuit Naming, ABC. I think some other countries may use other letters. Circuit Sequence. Here we go. This is the sequence that it circuits. Right now, it's set up to circuit things numerically. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it'll jump across your panel, left, right, left, right. But another way you can do is just grouping by phase. We prefer to go odd than even, so apply that. So now as we circuit, the next circuit would fill up the rest. If these weren't spares, it would fill up the rest of the circuit. Go to 19, 20, 23. Then it would jump over and do these. That's how you select how things are ordered. But I will throw out that that can be an issue when you're working on a switchboard, because you don't necessarily you want it to skip 1, 3, 5, 7. You want it to go in order. There's a way to deal with that, and that's in one of my pro tips that we're getting close to here at the end of this video. Another thing under Manage, MEP Settings, Electrical Settings, is actually down here at Panel Schedules. You can change the name of the spare label. I leave spare. You maybe want it capitalized. The space label, some people say space, some people say blank, some people say provisions. You can put whatever you want. You want to include the spares in your panel totals? Well, like I showed you, that can be handy if you want to use spares for another reason. And then merge multi-poled circuits into a single cell. I showed you before where they put 135 here, but that's not what this is. That just means that it will get rid of the lines between cells. So here, merge into a single cell. And it did it automatically. As you can see, this 3-pole breaker, they got rid of the lines and just made it one big cell. I prefer that. I think it stands out as a multi-pole circuit a little better, so I leave that one on. We're towards the end of this video, and I want to give these pro tips for you. So first pro tip is if I set this to 84 circuits, 84 circuits, apply it. Now if I go to my panel schedule, 84 circuits, okay, there we go, look at that, 84 circuits. So let's take this other studio and move it down. Now that looks fine. I think they've actually fixed this in 2025. In previous versions, everything beyond 42 would be center justified rather than left justified. So if you're using previous versions, one thing you may want to do is to go to your template, edit your template, and then force it to be 84. Now see how these are nicely aligned left. But again, in the older versions, you may have to take all of these and take them from center and bring them to the left. And then once you've done that, you can go back to variable. So again, if you have a previous version, you may find that's an issue. Pro tip number 2, how to reassign what kind of schedule gets applied to your piece of equipment. Now, what I'll use as an example here is a generator. This project doesn't have a generator in it. Let me bring in a generator that comes from Revit's cloud. So we will go to Insert, load Autodesk family. And we will go to electrical, MEP, generation and transformers, diesel emergency generator. Click that and let's load that in. And we'll overwrite the existing version. They must have already had one in here. So we'll go up to families, close panel schedules, close sheets. Let's get to families and go down to electrical equipment, diesel emergency power generator. Bring in the 200 kW generator. We will set it out here somewhere. Now, I like to create a load summary for my generator to add up all of my loads that are connected to the generator. So I want to create a panel schedule for this. So go up to create panel schedule and let's choose a template. Now look, my choose a template, I only have choices of branch panels. Well, I don't want this to be a branch panel. I don't have 42 circuit breakers in my generator. I want this to be a switchboard. Well, I can't get a switchboard from here. So I have to change this generator to be a switchboard style panel schedule. I have to go into the family to do this. So again, this might be a little advanced for some people, but jump right into the family editor. All we're going to change is one thing. Okay, in the generator, go over to this little yellow folder, family, category, and parameters. Click that. Now this sets it up to be electrical equipment, which is what we want. That's the family category. Now family parameters. Down here, you'll see part type. It's set up as a panel board for part type. That dictates which schedule type it gets. So change this to a switchboard, okay? And then load it back in your project. You can save it if you want. I'm not going to at this point. I just want to overwrite the one in my project. Now, if I was to click on it and say create panel schedule, choose a template, now I'm in the switchboards. And then I can apply the ER style that I like. And I would furthermore create yet another copy of this and call it generator rather than switchboard. And speaking of switchboards, pro tip number 3, I have it set up for odd than even circuiting like I mentioned. If I was to connect some things, the way I can get around odd and even on a switchboard itself is go back in, select your switchboard, in this case the generator. Down at the bottom right, one of the instance parameters for your panels and switchboards, your equipment, is at the very bottom. Circuit numbering options. Built-in parameter. It's default, which means it's going to fall back to that odd than even. I can manually select continue numbering. Apply it. Now, as I connect things to this switchboard or generator, it will put them in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 order, not in the odds and even that I pick. So I don't have to change that global parameter back to numerical. I can individually change it for each switchboard. And then pro tip number 4 is the renaming of panels is not as intuitive as you might like. So over here, let's get to my panel schedules. Now, let's say that I want to name this panel, instead of P203, it's for a unit. Let's say it's for an apartment. So I want to call it U203. Hit enter. Well, it still says P203 over here. What happened in the plan view? Let's go to our panel. It's already selected. It did get U203 here in the smart tag, which means that it got changed in the panel name. So the panel name does get reflected here in the panel, but it doesn't name it over here. Panel schedule name on the right is a different parameter than the name of the actual panel. So the panel schedule has its own name that doesn't mimic the panel name. So you have to manually, either over here or even here, you can hit F2 and rename it to U203. But just keep that in mind. If you're renaming panels, you need to manually come through and rename the panel schedule to show it properly, at least in your project browser.